The title of today's reflection is When Might Makes Right. The gospel reading comes from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 18, verses 1 to 40. When Jesus had finished praying, he and his disciples crossed the Kidron Valley and went into a garden. Jesus had often met there with his disciples, and Judas knew where the place was. Judas had promised to betray Jesus, so he went to the garden with some Roman soldiers and temple police who had been sent by the chief of priests and Pharisees. They carried torches, lanterns, weapons. Jesus already knew everything that was going to happen, but he asked, "Who are you looking for?" They answered, "We are looking for Jesus from Nazareth." Jesus told them, "I am Jesus." All at once, they backed away and fell to the ground. Jesus asked again, "Who are you looking for?" "We are looking for Jesus from Nazareth," they answered. This time Jesus replied, "I've already told you that I'm Jesus. If I'm the one you're looking for, let the others go. Then everything will happen just as I said. I did not lose any that you gave me." Simon Peter had brought a sword. He pulled it out and struck the servant of the high priest. The servant's name was Malchus, and Peter cut off his right ear. Jesus told Peter, "Put your sword away. I must drink from the cup that the Father has given me." The Roman officer and his men, together with the temple police, arrested Jesus and tied him up. They took him first to Annas, who was the father of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. This was the same Caiaphas who had told the Jewish leaders, "It is better if one person dies for the people." Simon Peter and the other disciple followed Jesus. The disciple knew the high priest, and he followed Jesus into the court of the high priest's house. Peter stayed outside, near the gate. But the other disciple came back and spoke to the girl at the gate. She let Peter go in, but asked him, "Aren't you one of the man's followers?" "No, I'm not," Peter answered. It was cold, and the servants and the temple police had made a charcoal fire. They were warming themselves around it when Peter went over and stood near the fire to warm himself. The high priest questioned Jesus and his followers and his teaching. But Jesus told him, "I have spoken freely in front of everyone, and I have always taught in our meeting places and in the temple where people can come together. I have not said anything in secret. Why are you questioning me? Why don't you ask the people who heard me? They know what I have said." As Jesus said this, one of the temple police hit him and said, "That's no way to talk to the high priest." Jesus answered, "If I've done something wrong, say so. But if not, why did you hit me?" Jesus was tied up, and Annas sent him to Caiaphas, the high priest. When Simon Peter was standing there warming himself, someone asked him, "Aren't you one of Jesus' followers?" Again, Peter denied it and said, "No, I am not." One of the high priest's servants was there. He was a relative of the servant whose ear Peter had cut off. And he asked, "Didn't I see you in the garden with that man?" Once more, Peter denied it. And right then, the rooster crowed. It was early in the morning when Jesus was taken to Caiaphas, to the building where the Roman governor stayed. But the crowd waited outside. Any of them who had gone inside would have become unclean and would not have been allowed to eat Passover meal. Pilate came out and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" They answered, "He's a criminal. That's why we brought him to you." Pilate said, "Take him and judge him by your own laws." The crowd replied, "We're not allowed to put anyone to death." And so what Jesus said about his death would soon come true. Pilate then went back inside. He called Jesus over and asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own? Or did someone tell you about me?" "You know I'm not a Jew," Pilate said. "Your own people and the chief priests brought you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom doesn't belong in this world. If it did, my followers would have fought to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. No, my kingdom doesn't belong to this world." "So you are a king," Pilate replied. "You are saying that I'm a king," Jesus told him. "I was born into this world to tell the truth, and anyone who belongs to the truth knows my voice." Pilate answered, "What's the truth?" Pilate went back out and said, "I don't find this man guilty of anything. And since I usually set a prisoner free at Passover, would you like me to set free the king of the Jews?" They shouted, "No, not him. We want Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a terrorist. There's symbolism in this story that is deep, that runs very deep. There's symbolism about the location where Jesus was arrested. Because of Jesus, the Garden of Gethsemane is the Garden of Obedience. There's a small stream called the Brook of Kidron, which means dusky and gloomy because the water was stained by blood from temple sacrifices. In the Kidron Valley, close to the stream stained with sacrificial blood, close to the Garden of Gethsemane, a garden that can symbolize suffering, Jesus is found. The valley is a symbol of rejection and betrayal, going back to the time of King David, when David was rejected by the nation and betrayed by his own son, Absalom. And it was in this deeply symbolic and meaningful location that Jesus was arrested and betrayed by one of his disciples. The Passion of Christ moves into its final stages, steps that culminate in the empty tomb that we see on Easter Sunday. The group who came to arrest Jesus included officers of the temple police, a Jewish force that helped keep order and carry out the orders of the Sanhedrin, and it included Roman soldiers. There's a wide range of opinions about how many soldiers came to arrest Jesus. The number of soldiers really isn't known for sure, but the term used could place the number in the range of 1,200 cavalry and 600 infantry, down to as few as maybe the range of 200 soldiers. R.V.G. Tasker, who wrote the Tyndale New Testament commentary for John, thinks there were 600 soldiers. Contributors to the NIV commentary come down on the side of about 600 soldiers. Henry Haley appears to think there are between 500 and 600 soldiers. Even if the lowest number of soldiers given by theologians were present, the number of soldiers involved in Jesus' arrest was significant. Barclay notes that they brought an expedition to arrest an unarmed carpenter. He states that the fact that the authorities sent almost an army To arrest Jesus is a compliment to the power of Jesus. In the passage, we read of Jesus asking who the authorities were seeking. They say they're looking for Jesus. Instead of choosing to slip away, which Jesus might have easily been able to do, Jesus identified himself as the one they were seeking. Bible scholar and commentator William Barclay says this shows that Jesus chose to die, observing that Jesus helped his enemies arrest him. He chose to die. Jesus' act can be considered an act of protective love. Theologian R.V.G. Tasker also holds the position, saying he gives himself up to his assassins, so his disciples should remain free. The interpreter's commentator observes, here Jesus is in full control of what happens. His rest is not possible without his voluntary submission. When Jesus first identified himself as the person the authorities were seeking, all the soldiers fall back. This shows the power that Jesus had. Respected commentator Matthew Henry describes the soldiers falling back as being like they were thunderstruck. He notes that Jesus could have killed the soldiers. There are some parallels between the problems faced by Jesus' society and by our contemporary society. Jesus was an unarmed, progressive rabbi. He advocated radically different approaches, but he was no military threat to the Roman government. And yet it's possible that 600 soldiers came looking for Jesus. What the religious leaders and Roman officials of Jesus' day did not know is that might does not make right. Sadly, some contemporary religious and secular leaders also don't seem to know that might does not make right. Roughly a year after George Floyd's death, while he was in police custody, one of the police officers was convicted of killing George Floyd. The world watched a 9-minute video clip of George Floyd as he took his final breaths. The last minutes of his life resulted in protests around the world, including the city where I live. There were months of protests across cities in the United States. Portland mothers, known as the Portland Moms, came out to stand between the police and the protesters. Their goal was to help prevent violence. If memory serves me right, Portland dads came out with their leaf blowers and blew mace away from the Portland moms and the protesters back on the police. I'm not sure if the Portland dads got involved because there might have been some concern about the impact of mace and pepper spray on pregnant mothers and developing fetuses, but it's possible. Probably no other event in the last 50 years has more focused public attention around the world on systemic racism and the evils of racism than the death of George Floyd. Regardless of what we think about George Floyd, his death spotlighted an important topic: racism. At George Floyd's funeral, his young daughter told President Joe Biden, "Daddy changed the world." When Joe Biden phoned after the jury's verdict and talked with George Floyd's family, Joe Biden told George Floyd's daughter this: "Daddy did change the world. The police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck might have thought might makes right, and that might will solve the problems they'd had detaining George Floyd. And things mushroomed as George Floyd became a symbol. A few of the religious leaders and Roman officials might have thought might makes right, and they would rid the Roman Empire, rid the empire of the influence of this radical Jewish teacher. Instead, Jesus' crucifixion resulted in an enormous increase in Jesus' influence. From a small, dedicated group of disciples, the followers of Jesus grew into one of the largest religions in the world. A religion that counts its adherents in the billions, not in the millions or the hundreds of millions, but in the billions. And many non-Christians appreciate and respect the teachings of Jesus. John chapter 18 is relevant well beyond the Easter season. The chapter may encourage us to think carefully before we employ might makes right in our personal lives as a problem-solving strategy, in the corporate lives of our church communities as a problem-solving strategy, and at national and provincial levels. Problems oppressed and squelched can end up being problems that are not solved. And this chapter can also call us to continue the denominational work regarding racism.